Had a few thousand people walking through here over the last couple of months who have spent some time with each of these portraits and didn't really have the benefit of the inside scoop that we're going to get tonight. So I'm very excited about it. And I love Lenore because she shows up, you know, I mean, and she just shows up and she shows up. And she's got her tools with her, and she contributes her photographs of all our events, and so she continues this work of documenting history as we go, and it's being archived and saved on the internet and in our archives. And I'm very excited that we're going to be getting the contributions of some of these photos to our archives, and hopefully that will be the beginning of a much larger Lenore Chinn collection. So I'm excited to hear what...
my studio.
We'll clear out the closet. So welcome, Lenore.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming, and thank you for the museum and all the staff and volunteers who have helped to put this project together. It's been a labor of love. As Terry had mentioned, the idea of having art in this way was a sort of a new concept to not only this museum, but many museums that have more of a historical emphasis. And what I've often said is that, you know, if you think of, at least in my art history, the art history that I was taught in high school and college and whatnot, limited though it might be at the time, is that, you know, we always remember seeing those bazillion slides, and that was something I was talking to Laura about, you know, what did you get from that art education? And I said, you know, it's hard to remember because we were bombarded with thousands of slides. And I said, I don't have the capacity to remember names per se, but usually I can remember images, and if it's a favorite, you know, era or style or whatever, then at least if I don't have a senior moment, I'll recollect, oh, that's the French painter Monet or whatever, you know. And some of them are people who were, you know, very inspiring. And while my images are maybe different in some way, I think that I absorbed a lot of the you know, images that I saw either growing up. I had talked to others that in the past, because my dad was a mathematician, and he was very sort of ahead of his time, a very worldly man, and he also had a great love of art of all kinds, and different cultures, different art forms. I was exposed to the theater arts, and so this afternoon, Moira and I got together to talk a little bit about my work for a project we're working on, and I said, you know, that whatever you're exposed to, somehow it seeps into your work, consciously or not, you know, and I had the benefit of being able to see musicals and theater productions, you know, everything from Hello Dolly to Evita and whatnot. And, you know, all of those things, they come together in some way, you know, because you open your eyes and you have this curiosity about you. All of these paintings here, it's sort of a lineage of my, not my blood family per se, but they are my family. The oldest pieces here are this one here, which is called Son Cuates. These were two of my closest friends when I was 18, and this was like 50 years ago. Unfortunately, they died of SIDA, so they're not around. And the whole core group that I grew up with of gay Latino men, young men, when I was very young, are all gone. These two, and Avelio, who I knew as Tris, they were all in the arts. And they too exposed me to everything from gay nightclubs to their performances. Tommy was a dancer, and he would also be in little theater, and so, you know, they pulled me along to various things when I used to go down to the LA area. Doug, I knew when I was going to City College, so he was the first in that group that I got to know. And some of you might have met him over the years. But This picture of them was taken by me in front of the Legion of Honor in Lincoln Park before it had a gate. Now if you go up there, there's a gate across the portal. But this was done very, very early on, like 1981, something like that. And within 3 years, Tommy was gone. 5 years later, Doug was gone. And in that same time frame, so was Tris. This was during a time frame when there was no name to the disease. They were still trying to figure out the epidemiology. And in some cases, they were not out to their families, so that was a whole other complexity. And it was a very painful experience because not only did they have to deal with that with their families when they had to say, oh, I'm gay and I'm sick and I'm dying. And how does a family, come to terms with that? Well, some of them probably never did because they had a lot of denial going on. They came from a very Catholic family in Texas, and that's actually one of the reasons why they ended up in California, which when they came out to California, I want to say the 70s or before that, it was like a candy store here. It was a playground. And who knew what was coming down the line? None of us knew that, and none of us was prepared. Moira was asking me today, and I've had young people who I've talked to on college campuses who say, well, when I go through a PowerPoint and show them the breadth of my work and images, and I introduce them, by the end of the presentation, an hour or so, they feel like they kind of know them because they have names, and I knew them personally, and they had stories, and they had aspirations, and they had dreams, and then they weren't realized. And then they look around and they say, oh my God, what would I do if this happened to my community now? And I said, well, we didn't know. We invented things as we came along. We saw various needs and we tried to jump in. And, one of the basic things that happened, and Carl, who's my lawyer friend and art collector, one of the things that we had to struggle with was just getting the right to visit our friends and our partners in the hospital. That was not a given in those days. And there were a number of other issues, as many of you may be aware. So that's them, and I might touch on them a little bit more. Tris was a leather guy, so somebody just brought up that the Folsom Street Fair is coming up, and are you going and do you go? And I said, well, one, I don't go anymore. It's just, I can't take that big of a crowd, especially as the day wears on, and it's so claustrophobic. But it's also not the same, because a lot of the things that I used to do, like going to various street fairs, I just can't bring myself to go. It doesn't have the same kind of fun as we enjoyed, and it was with a particular group of people that I used to go to. So I don't have that same kind of attraction, so to speak, because it was part of it was going with your friends. And I used to go with Tris, and we'd go down there and see the guys, with and without leather, sometimes with snakes around their heads and whatnot. I mean, it was a very festive event. If you're not used to that, it can be shocking, So anyway, they introduced me to that part of their lives, and they used to talk about all the clubs they went to and all of that. They would have loved to have snuck me into some of them, but that didn't happen. Anyhow, that was those two. Let's see, moving along here. Mike Hausch and Rick Pecura I got to know through gay politics. We were all in the Harvey Milk Club before it had lesbian and other letters attached to it. And we all worked for Art Agnos, who was the mayor in 1988, I guess. I was on the Human Rights Commission for 4 years, and a number of us were either appointed to various government bodies or we served under various legislators at the time. So I still know a few of them from that time frame because we shared that experience of, being the sort of the next wave to serve in various city departments. Mike is still around. He was here on opening night, so people have got a chance to talk to him about his experience. And Rick worked for one of the Burtons when they were around, and not all of the brothers or whatever are around anymore, but Rick was another close friend, and they wanted to have a commissioned painting sort of commemorating their relationship, and at that point they had been together for 10 years. And so we went down Haight Street somewhere and stood in front of a diner, and I took a picture and developed the painting from that. And actually, when Rick passed away, the painting was put on an easel in North Lake Court as part of the memorial, and people thought, oh my God, it looks like they're going to come out of the painting. And so that was the story there. I had another story I was going to veer off on, but it'll come back to me. What was I going to say now? Let's see. Okay, let's talk about John Arbuckle is a local artist who does exquisite still lifes, and he's still around. He was here on opening night also, and chatted with us about the experience of staging this painting, and because he's an artist, and could help pull some ideas together which spoke to their lives together. Gary was a writer, and they had traveled extensively, so we pulled things together that referenced some of their interests, and it's sort of a homey environment, so to speak, but from a gay perspective. There were a couple of, I know what I was going to say. There were a couple of images here that I was invited to show in China when I was on a cultural exchange tour led by the artist Flo Oi Wong. And they wanted to see what the work looked like before, we went over there. And so, knowing how China could be around issues of lesbian and gay, people and whatnot, I thought, I want to make sure I get in there and out of there without too many controversies. And so I wasn't sure how far I could push it. Now, by some people's standards, maybe the images are pretty tame if you live in the Bay Area and you're used to this. But for others, even something as subtle as a gay couple, is too sensitive. And that's what happened to one of the pieces. So what happened was I sent them to probably a website or two, and they thought, oh, no problem, And I thought, I think there's something wrong here. I just was anticipating there could be an issue. And so I thought, maybe I better send them a JPEG or two just to give them an idea of what my body of work looks like. Whoa, Well, the one of Mike and Rick passed. There's a couple over there. But the one of John and Gary, they considered too sensitive, And so I thought, okay, I'll pull that one, and I'll sort of mix it up a little bit with other images. I can't remember if I showed that one or not. But this one passed. And my feeling is that they didn't realize that Ellen is a woman. This is Ellen Myers, and she is the partner of the artist and art professor at CCA, Kim Ano. And but the funny thing is, when I was giving my portion of the presentation in China, a lot of the students pulled out their cell phones and their cameras, and they were taking pictures of the presentation. And at the end of my talk, I said, I'm online, because I figured they could find it. They know how to find them, even if they have to hack. They can find those images if they're interested, And so at the end of the talk, I was handing out a lot of my postcards, and I'm sure they could find it, somehow. And so I feel like that was as Kim would say, that's my transgressive, subversive method of spreading the word, so to speak, that we're out there and we're all over the world, and visibility for a variety of reasons in terms of gender, ethnicity, LGBTQ, all of those have always been a part of my sort of modus operandi, if you will. People have asked, well, how did you create this body of work? What were you thinking when you went down this road? And I said, well, when I started this, it wasn't my intention to go out and paint a lot of gay people, But what happened was, as many artists who particularly who do figurative work or do photography or whatever, you take pictures of your friends, your friends, your family. If they're not the subject for a theme you're working on, they're the subject of memorializing the relationship or something like that. And then after 30 years or whatever, and people are thinking you're totally insane, you'll never sell anything, you'll never get into a gallery, which was largely true, except for the handful of collectors I've enjoyed over the period of years that enabled me to sell on occasion. But how I subsidized my work was working in healthcare for 35 years. I worked up on the hill at Franklin Hospital, now it's called Davies, and then it was taken over by the corporation. And I left not long after that, and I felt that it was time to move on. I was able to leave, but it served me well because I had benefits in those days, and that enabled me to do my art and my political activism and all the other things that I was interested in. And over the years, the people that I had met that either became part of my subjects or subjects for my work, they were people that I knew socially, or through my LGBT politics, or through my cultural, events. I would often run into some of these people, and then I got to know them. And because most of us who did this kind of sort of work that might be considered marginalized by museums, we ended up moving in the nonprofit world. And so that's how we picked up some of the skills that we never learned in art school, like how to install a show and how to do your own publicity and all of that kind of a thing. So, you kind of pick up things as you go along. That's sort of like, that's your trade school, learning how to put all those pieces together. Let's see, did I talk about everybody yet? Okay, now those two, that's my most recent painting, and that was done in 2012. I haven't been painting since then, and the long story short is because one, I ran out of room, two, I thought there was going to be a retrofit coming to the building, so I packed everything away, and I started to transition into photography, which had always been a part of my painting work anyway, but it was not my primary expressive medium. Painting was really what I enjoyed, because I could get totally lost in my work, because some of these paintings take months. It's a very, very layered technique. It's extremely detailed, and a lot of times they're large like this. So it's very time consuming, and I enjoy getting lost in my work that way. Sometimes people have said, gee, your paintings look like photos. And are you a photorealist? And people have different ideas of what photorealism is. It's not that you're trying to necessarily replicate a photograph. And in most cases, I take the photos, but I do something more to it to bring out the texture and all of that. So the surface isn't just flat, The other thing that I've talked to people about is, the importance of scale, and also the importance of placement on a wall and distance, because sometimes I think because my work is so extremely detailed, they want to look real close and see how something was rendered. And then they'll say, well, gee, your work is so saturated with warm colors and everything. And they have gotten brighter over the years. But I said, well, you're actually looking too close to get the effect, And I was explaining to Moira one of the things that I've told people who look too close, and they don't quite get the picture, is that, think of this as a theater stage. And I think part of this may come from my exposure to theater and my theater friends. To get the real impression, you have to step back. It's like in a theater, they wear makeup. If you look at them real close, my God, they're cakes of makeup, right? This has a similar concept. You have to get back to the right distance to take it all in. The other thing is I often shoot at a low angle up. So what happens when you do that is it pulls the viewer in. And if the painting is at a somewhat proper level, the viewer will feel that they're part of the experience and part of, the room with them. And the size of the figures is also important. So, when they're looking at that, the viewer completes the image, because then they get a chance to absorb that. And you don't get that same kind of a thing looking at a small photo, which are beautiful, because I enjoy that too. And actually, my uncle was a fairly well-known photographer, Lenore Chinn, And he was sort of an indirect mentor to me too. If you look him up online, now you can see him online. He studied under Ansel Adams and Imogene Cunningham, and he was exposed to a bunch of those West Coast photographers. He was a student at the California School of Fine Arts. Now it's called the Art Academy, San Francisco Art Institute. And he studied in Paris. And so between him and his brother, my dad, who also exposed me to art, I think they allowed me the permission to do my art. My mother wasn't so sure about that because it's like, oh, you'll never get a job and you need something practical, you know, learn to type, you know, or something, you know. I didn't learn typing until much later, not in high school as many did. But I realized, oh, all these people, they're working on computers. Well, I don't even know how to type, so I taught myself to type. And so anyway, all of those things combined kind of allowed me to develop my art over a period of time. And I think my mother was, one, relieved when I got a job in healthcare because, oh, I'm not going to end up on their doorstep, you know, as an adult. And also that the other thing too is when I started exhibiting, what I was doing was I was sending slides, 35mm color slides back in the day. I would send it out to, you know, the Arts Commission. Many years ago there was a wonderful place called the Lucien Lebeau Art Gallery in San Francisco. It was located on Gough Street. Marcelle Lebeau was the French lady who ran the place. And it was named after her husband, Lucien, who was a dressmaker and artist. And he was responsible for a lot of the murals around the city, like I think in Court Tower and other places. So I'm lucky that I have all these sort of connections that just happened over a period of time. And I think part of it was because I did what I wanted to do. And you know, while I might have been disappointed not to get into mainstream galleries, for me it ended up fine because I painted on my own terms and I had the job that enabled me to supplement my income while I did what I really wanted to do. And then when I started getting into shows around the country, then my mom thought, oh, well, this is kind of nice, you know. And all of a sudden she thought, oh, this, you know, her daughter's a painter, you know, even though I never made any real money. That was okay because, you know, they could come to the openings. You know, they enjoyed that. And then another little sidebar is, you know, this was my little coming out story. I was receiving an award in the green room. Carl, were you there? I can't remember. You might have been there. Probably. Yeah, the green room, because we go back a long, long time. Anyway, so I was receiving a Human Rights Award for helping to run a blood drive through the Harvey Milk Club. And so my parents were there. And my father, who had wild Einstein hair, you know, he was very excited. The Chinese newspapers wanted to interview us and everything, and my mother was like well-dressed, very petite woman and everything. What? Oh my God, what are my little girlfriends going to say, you know? But she allowed the picture to be taken, and I still have it, and my dad's, you know, glowing. My mother has this pained expression or whatever. But she came to terms with it too, and also I think part of it was, even though she had a really hard time around the issue of AIDS and all these people dying and they're you know, taking up all the resources and blah, 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 when she realized how close to home it was, and that Doug had died and Tommy had died and all these other people who came to the house were gone too, then it started to cause a shift in her heart, I think. And also, she and my dad had hired a gay gardener who used to work at Bill's place on Clement. Hamburger place, yeah. And Bill worked on the little garden in the back, and my dad loved gardens, and I do too. I think I inherited that too, although I can't water plants very well. But anyway, I got the love, right? And so my mother enjoyed gossip, and so once she kind of got past the gay idea, then she could go out when Dawn came to work on the garden and landscape it. Then she would, you know, engage him in conversation, you know, and feel like she was like, you know, included. And so that was her other little segue or whatever. The other little anecdote is that the twins who my folks knew shared the same birthday, September the 11th. And so I'll never forget September 11th. And Doug and my mom, because Doug lived in town, one of them had bought a birthday card, and then on the back it said, "It's you can recycle this." So every year they would send it back to me. And somewhere in my archives, I think I still have that birthday card. Let's see. Let me talk about the photos here. The photos are more recent. I think the earliest piece is around 2005 or so. I'll start at the top. I used to actually do film. Some people still do film. I actually couldn't take darkroom work anymore because the chemicals were so toxic. I would walk into a darkroom and my skin would just get kind of whitish. I'm highly allergic. But then it's actually kind of toxic anyway, So while I started in film when I was going to college, I would develop in the darkroom. I used to take pictures. When I first learned, I learned on a 4x5 graphic view camera, which is pretty heavy. And then I got my own 35mm camera. Well, years go by, and I'm actually happy that digital is available because now I don't have to worry about toxic chemicals and that kind of thing. So as many of you know, especially if you're on Facebook with me, I go to a lot of events. I go to a lot of cultural events. Usually they're events that my friends are involved with, and and if they're all in the arts or politics or whatever, I often have my camera, so I document that. Like yesterday, I was in the Mission, and I must have come home with 700 photos. Because there was a lot going on yesterday. I went to take pictures of the vintage cars, and it wasn't until I chatted with Esther Hernandez that I realized, oh, there's a whole festival going on. So I ended up staying there much longer than I intended, and so I have way too many photos. But anyway, it's very handy because most of these photos here were spontaneously done. They're not commissioned portraits or anything, but I know all of these people. Jean Weisinger in the top left corner is an Oakland-based photographer, and some of you might have seen some of her work on the book jackets of Alice Walker. So in the background of that photo, you can see some of her images that she's taken around the world or locally. She happened to have a banjo, and she was fiddling around with it, so I pulled out my camera and I took that photo, and it's actually one of our favorites. On the right is Viet Le, a Vietnamese performance artist and a teacher at California College of the Arts in town. And I happened to be at a lecture being given at Timken Hall at CCA in San Francisco, and I think it might have been sponsored by QCC, Queer Cultural Center. So the panelists there were Asian Pacific Islanders from the LGBT community, and he was one of them. And I was planted in the front row so I could take pictures of him, and so I got that one on that occasion. Below here on the left is Native American Hulea. How do you pronounce her name again?
Hulea.
Hulea, yeah. And so she was part of an exhibit at USF, University of San Francisco, that was featuring indigenous crafts and other contemporary work by Native artists. So she happened to be in town with her partner Veronica and their son Amari, and that one was a spontaneous shot, and so it ended up to be a nice little family portrait, sort of taken on the fly. And on the right is the rock musician June Millington, who's half Filipino and half white, and she happened to be in town to celebrate her birthday as she was getting ready to fly out to Honolulu for a performance. And she contacted me, because we had been on Facebook together for a little while. We have some mutual friends. She said, oh, I'm coming into San Francisco. I don't know if you have time. It's kind of last minute, but would you like to join our barbecue? Deb Gravian, another rock musician friend of hers, they're having a great barbecue and you should come. So I dropped everything and ran over there and took pictures, and she and her sister was also there. Her sister, Jean, They were part of the group called Fanny. And Jean was there also. And so they performed for the crowd that day. And as I was telling Moira, Ben Fong Torres happened to be out there as a rock journalist because he's known Jean for quite a long time. So he wanted to get an interview with her. So I took pictures of everybody that day. And I got that one just before she flew out. Down on the bottom, we have Vero Mahano and her partner, Carrie Orvik. Vero does a lot of projects in the mission, organizing film, creating exhibitions, performance art, and all of that. And they were working on a project called the Q-Sides that was shown at Galleria de la Raza. And they had the vintage cars there too on 24th for that event. Carrie is a photographer, and she does tintype work now. So some of my artist friends have sort of resurrected the old method of creating tintypes, but from a contemporary point of view. So Carrie does that. That's what she does partly to earn a living. So that was during the opening, and I shot that in the door. Hi, Mike.
Hello.
This is Mike. He's pictured over there.
Oh, yes. Wow. Sorry, I got stuck late at work.
I thought you were retired. What are you doing?
No, they reeled me back. I was brought back under Prop F to do research support for a documentary on the history of the PUC.
Oh. Wow. You can never go away.
Now, that's because I'm the only one who knows where everything is, I think.
Oh, no. Anyway, that's my couch. Let's see. Okay. This last photo here is Elsa Hidalgo Litalipa, and she's a filmmaker. She does a lot of short subjects and little documentaries and things, and this was taken of her, when was this? 2007. Oh, you got better eyes than me.
Glasses on.
Yeah, well, I have cataracts. I know. Anyway, that was taken of her where she and her mom were living in Hayward at the time, and that's her pickup truck, and the pickup truck had finally died, so there isn't that anymore. But it was another one of those spontaneous events where I went to visit the family and took that picture. I think it must have been near sunset because it was kind of glowing at that hour. So anyway, that's sort of the synopsis of these images. If you have any questions, feel free. And Grace is another friend of mine who I've painted. A lot of the paintings are spread out all over the place because I just ran out of room, so I have them in different people's homes. Or
I was wondering how many paintings you painted in your artistic career. You know, you've taken a lot of photographs.
I know, a bazillion photographs, but paintings, not nearly as many. I want to say somewhere between 30 and 60. I would have to go home and look at my inventory, and that doesn't seem a lot, but they take forever, you know, to do. And I kind of like to think of like, who is it, that artist, is it Van Gogh, who actually didn't do that many paintings? You know, there's a few. I mean, a lot of people are really prolific, like Salvador Dali, you know, you got all these different things. But no, you know, it's not a huge body in terms of paintings, but a bazillion of photos. And I like to say, well, the paintings take up much more room, at least with the photos, most of them are on a hard drive. I just have to remember what I named the files, or what year, you know, and then I used to be able to locate them on iPhoto, but then that was discontinued, or sometimes it won't open anymore. You know, that was an easy way because then you could do a search. Sometimes I find the easiest way to find something is if I've uploaded it to Facebook. I'm really lucky that so far they haven't wiped out, you know, because one time one of my relatives said, "Do you know you have 20,000 images on Facebook?" I said, "Yeah, and there's a reason I keep them there," you know, because the pictures aren't high res, but sometimes it's helpful to track down when I did something, you know, like if I remember, oh, I was at such and such a march or whatever, or I'm trying to find somebody says, oh, you know, you took a picture of me at some event or whatever, and I'm thinking, oh God, can you give me more of a clue and nail it down, you know? Sometimes I can find something like that on Facebook, and then if I'm lucky, I can find the original, you know, high-res TIFF you know, if my external hard drive hasn't died. And that's happened to me too. So I obsessively back things up. Yeah,
I'm assuming you're from San Francisco?
native.
You're native?
Mhm. And my dad too.
Yeah.
Yeah, my dad was born and raised in Oakland, San Francisco, Chinatown. And my mom grew up in Oakland, Chinatown. And they kind of used to have a giggle because I don't know how many people here know about the concept of paper sons, daughters, and whatnot. But my father always used to have a giggle over this story because he said, you know, because of the fire that happened with the city hall and whatnot, a lot of the records were burned. So they could say, oh, well, you know, you can't come after us because we were citizens. Well, they actually were, you know, but it could get a little complicated. My mother was not so lucky, and I don't know the full story because neither of them are around anymore, and none of that generation of siblings are around to ask anymore, you know. But my mother, for her entire life until she married my dad, used the last name Huang, which is probably one of the most common last names, real or not. But her actual name was Quan. And she didn't reclaim that name until she died, and then my father had it put up on the wall at Chapel of the Chimes. So other than that, a lot of people also were afraid to reclaim their names for fear of, you know, some issues or whatever. And as we know, with things going on right now, that could be an issue.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, yeah, my brother and I are the second generation Americans, but we have a huge family. My father had, counting some of the siblings who had passed, some as very young kids, there were 12 children in my dad's family. And my grandfather, who I never knew my grandparents on that side, they died well before I came along. My grandfather owned and ran gambling houses. Legally, he was a merchant. And he ran, for a while there, I guess in the early days, he ran like dry goods places. But he ran gambling houses from here to Santa Cruz. He might have had something going on in Oakland. In those times, you know, people did whatever they could to survive. And a lot of my friends, their older relatives were in the gambling business of some sort. And I used to joke with my dad because he and some of his siblings used to help their dad run numbers. And what they did was, my dad had described this one time, they would have pages from poetry books with the Chinese characters, and there were holes punched out in different characters, and I think that must have delineated whatever numbers people were betting. And so he and some of his brothers, I guess, they would run from store to store and collect these different, you look shocked, they would collect these papers and turn them into, you know, their dad or whatever, and they would run through Chinatown with them stuffed in their socks. That's how he ran the numbers. You know, if you ever go up to the little town called Locke, there's a little museum there, and I've been there a few times, and I've read some of the little captions and the little stories. I thought those are the same stories my dad used to tell me. And of course, when my dad started telling me these stories as an adult, my mom would look at him with this sort of glance like, you know, don't talk about that. You know, they don't want to talk about that, or the fact that they. As minors, they would visit the Forbidden City or any number of those, you know, Chinese nightclubs or whatever, because their friends performed there, you know, and they knew everybody. Everybody knew everybody in Chinatown, and so, you know, that was another little anecdote. Any other questions before I go off? Yeah, Ruth?
Can you talk about the middle photograph?
Oh yeah, I got sidetracked. Okay, Chelsea, the lady on the left, is a musician, and not too long after I met her, within a year or so, she moved to LA, and she does, I think she does something sort of like hip hop or whatever. You know, she sings, she performs, she writes, and her friend who, you know, I've known her under a number of pseudonyms. She calls herself Lala Opani. Now she's living in Honolulu. But she's a visual artist and a graphic artist. When I met them, I was on my way to a group show that I was in across the street. Some of you may know Melanie and Melora Green in town. They're a pair of twins, and they put on a lot of cultural projects in town. Well, I was on my way to a little pop-up gallery that they had created across the street from Yoshi's. Well, it's not even Yoshi's or the other one, Addison. It's not even that anymore. Things keep changing so fast. I was passing the bookstore. It's where they have the Heritage Foundation, Fillmore Heritage Foundation. There used to be a little bookstore and gift shop and a little gallery, and sometimes during the jazz festivals along Fillmore, you know, some musicians would be in there playing and whatnot. Well, they were standing in front of there selling their T-shirts, and we stopped to chat with them and ended up buying a couple of T-shirts. They had a little ironing board out, and I can't remember exactly what it says, but it's called Voodoo, VEUXDO. And so I took a few pictures of them, and when I blew it up on the computer, I thought, wow, that's really kind of interesting. And I like the idea that they're in front of this window, which, as I pointed out, it's not quite as obvious, but the one of Rick and Mike, there's also a window with reflections and things like that. I like these, like, you know, mirrors and reflections, and I think in some way it's my homage to Richard Estes, you know, because he does all of those very intricate, much more intricate buildings with glass and reflections and things like that. Well, anyway, so that store isn't around there anymore either. You know, that whole shop, bookstore, all of that is gone. So, you know, sometimes I can't paint fast enough. Sometimes I can't even take pictures fast enough. I go somewhere, you know, because like Nancy Hahn, one of our local artists, said, "Oh, I'm working on one of her mandalas," and she said, I want some pictures of, you know, the Fillmore and whatnot, and can you take some pictures of the boulangerie?" Well, I went to one up in Pacific Heights. There was already paper on the window. You know, I mean, things are just happening so fast in this town, you know. You know, a building goes up, you can't remember what was there before. A gas station? Who knows, you know what I mean? So anyway, so I painted that one, and then I showed it at the luggage store unfinished. It was so close to being finished. I thought, well, most people wouldn't know except me what I needed to do to finish it, you know, because I probably had to finish all the detail on that curling Hawaiian shirt she was wearing. And then the thing that really drove me crazy is the folds in her sleeves, you know, because you can't just, throw it on there. You have to follow the line. It has to make sense, right? And green is a difficult color. I don't know if you guys know this. But green is a difficult color to keep on the canvas. You know, I don't know why. There must be something in the pigment, but at least with the acrylics that I use, if I put it on, sometimes I pull away and the paint pulls away. You know, so that was tricky. The whole thing was tricky, but I really enjoyed that piece. And then I showed it at the luggage store. And then a little anecdote, I got a call from Jen Banta, who was helping me with the show. She said, she was helping to do the press releases and things, and she said, "We got a call from the Chronicle, and they want to meet you." And they said, "Can you come? Can we meet on, you know, a week or so later?" I said, "No, I'm leaving for Hawaii the day after the opening." "Oh." And I said, "Well, you can come to the opening. I'll be there, you know. I mean, it's right around the corner from the Chronicle building, right?" And so I met this really nice woman, Rachel Howard, I think, who has a background in dance. So an interesting person. She's a writer also. So she came, and she did a write-up of that. And then I go off to Hawaii, and you know, Hawaii was like several hours ahead of us. And I knew if it showed, you know, because she said, "No promises. We're not sure about, you know, whatever the news might bump something, you know." So anyway, I thought, okay, well, I was in Hawaii, and it was on my birthday, which is June 20th, and it wasn't time for the hard copy Chronicle to come out yet because, you know, it wasn't the next day. But she said, if it comes out, it's going to be on such and such a date. So I get up in the morning. One of my cousins had gotten her hard copy, and I also looked online. The online version was already there. But then one of my cousins, you know, got hers delivered, an actual hard copy, you know, to her front door, and she took a picture of it and posted it on Facebook, or, you know, I got it somehow. So then I sent I think I must have shared it on Facebook or something like that, and I'm friends with both of them there. And they thought, holy cow. And then their friends started calling them. They said, you're on the front page of the Chronicle in color. Yeah. So, you know, so they're very thrilled, you know, and they say, oh my God, we got this picture, blah, blah, blah. And so I still have connections with all of them who are still alive. That's my story.
So, Lenore, I think the Bianco is actually still there and still a Japanese restaurant
Which one?
on Church Street.
Really?
I'm pretty sure that's the storefront that you took.
I thought we were on H Street.
No, we were on Church Street.
Oh, your memory's better than mine. Really?
Oh, no, I have a crystal clear.
So, okay, so I can't see and I can't remember. So which one was it?
The restaurant's called Bianco, and I think it's still there.
Oh, Bianco, yeah, on Church.
And you particularly picked that place because you said they wash their window every day. So you got
to get those reflections. Yeah. Great.
Yeah, you did an amazing job documenting the history of people through your portraits and photography. And a young person looking at this exhibit would see the faces of the AIDS generation as being young, healthy, and good looking. For those of us who lived through the generation, we remember the wasting syndromes, the KS. Did you do any photography documenting the progression of the
No, I didn't dare. I probably took some pictures, but it wasn't obvious. I mean, they probably looked more gaunt, you know. But no, in most cases, I chose not to, you know. And I remember there was one of the most horrible images that stuck with me was when my friend Tommy was sick, and it was very, very close to the end. And he was a gorgeous person and a beautiful human being. And he had gotten non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which, you know, under other circumstances was more treatable. But with the virus, you could get anything, and it was like, you know, it could be horrible. And in his case, it was. And what happened was he had become blind, and I have another friend of mine who is still alive, Robert. Robert was his partner for many years, off and on, you know. And I was telling Moira earlier today that they were probably together more or less for about 15 years ago. And whenever I went down to Hollywood, usually on every 3-day weekend or whatever, even if Tommy and Robert were not together at the moment, I always thought of them as together, you know. And in the end, they were together because Robert was the one who took care of him, and he really loved him. But I remember one time when I went to visit, because on the last few trips, a bunch of us would pile into my van and we'd go down and visit. One time we got Tommy to escape from Cedars-Sinai Hospital for an afternoon or whatever, just to get out, you know. And the funny thing is, you know, he would look out the window and he would, you know, kind of like with this memory, because I think there was I don't know if it was a bathhouse or a gay bar across the street that he used to visit in his better days, you know. But we would escape. But anyway, one of the things that happened to him is that with his non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, his neck opened up and he had this open wound, and it was just the scariest looking thing that protruded from his neck, and Robert would have to clean that thing. It was just absolutely horrible. Unfortunately, Tommy couldn't see what was going on, or whatever, or hear that I was close enough to see what was going on, because he was very proud of his looks, you know. And in those days, it was very important to be good looking, you know? So that whole period was very sad.
Well, you should also give yourself some credit, because most people don't know this, but Lenore was one of the major movers behind the Blood Sisters. When there was, in the early days, there was a tremendous need for transfusion. Gay men had been banned from donating blood, and Lenore and many of her friends in the Harvey Milk Club at the time organized a group, Blood Sisters, and they literally saved people's lives.
Right around the corner
Blood
from here at Holy
donations.
Redeemer. Yeah, we did. That went on for about 9 years.
It was heroic.
Thank you.
Thank you.
They actually have T-shirts here that sort of commemorate that time frame. You know? Yeah. Great. Great? Yeah.
My question is about technique to check if what I'm seeing is actually there, but for 4 of the paintings, I noticed that the backgrounds, they are similar backgrounds, but the colors kind of like run together, and you're talking about how much detail you put in. Is that an actual thing that I'm seeing, that a lot of the detail are on your subjects, like the jacket, like I can feel it, it's shiny, and the skin, it feels like very realistic, but the background is
That's an
less
interesting
realistic.
observation.
So
I
it
hadn't
jumps
noticed.
out to me.
I hadn't noticed that part.
Oh.
But I do have a tendency to, I like to work with contrasts, you know, either thematically or with color. The detail thing is another interesting thing. I'll have to go back and look at my body of work. Because one of the things that a local curator, he's an elderly gentleman now, Bob Hanamura, he used to do a lot of curating in the Bay Area. He must be in his 80s or pushing 90 by now, maybe 90, I don't know. Anyway, he's still around, and he had curated a show, one of my very, very first shows around 1980, 79 or 80, at the Capricorn Asunder, which was the San Francisco Arts Commission's gallery over on Grove Street. The building is still there. Sometimes you see an installation in there, but that was one of my early shows. And Bob was the curator. And one of the quotes, and I was just telling this to Moira today, is he noticed that I throw in everything except a kitchen sink, but somehow everything is kept in place because of the way I work the composition and everything. And perhaps that's another subconscious thing of having, you know, the contrast of more detail in the foreground and maybe less in the background, more color in the foreground and whatnot. Of course, over the years, my paintings have gotten brighter, you know, and much more detailed. The other thing that he noticed that aside from the fact that I often shoot from a low angle, is that I place the subjects on the picture plane. You know, so they're like right there. And, you know, like I say, scale is important, but that's an interesting observation about the detail and everything. But yeah, you're right, it would make it pop out more, just like color and all of the other things. Good eye.